Welcome to Arcadia. I wanted to make this video about 2 weeks ago, but because of all the chaos going on with the OGL, I just couldn't. But let's take this week to step away a little bit from all the negative stuff and instead turn to something positive. New Year resolutions. One of mine was to complete Dungeon 23. Have you heard of it? If not, allow me to be your gateway into this awesome challenge. Dungeon 23 is a cool project/challenge proposed by Sean McCoy, where the goal is to create a 365-room dungeon by the end of 2023. In other words, create one room per day. This might sound intimidating, but the whole motto of the challenge is no plans, no overthinking, randomize, steal, simplify. It is supposed to be a quite laid-back project where a little work designing a room every day will give you a massive dungeon by the end of it. Sean himself says that if you're having a block, you can always resort to random generators for rooms, monsters, or treasure. You can borrow ideas from other creators. You can even write empty room if nothing comes to mind that day. The goal is simply to write a little bit every day. If you want more information, the link to the challenges page will be down below in the Underdark. It seems like a fun challenge and you should try it. I'll do it for sure, being a Mega Dungeon fan myself. As a matter of fact, I've been building my own for a few years. I call it the Infinity Tower. Wonder if you can get the reference. And I might just use this excuse to add a few more levels to it. In any case, I have learned a thing or two about Mega Dungeon design since I started, and I can share with you some quick tips. Before we begin though, bear in mind that this is not the everything you must know to design a Mega Dungeon video, because that would be a whole series. If I ever get to make it, I will link it in the eye up there, but for now, this is just the simplest and easiest advice I have for you to use during Dungeon 23. Tip number 1. Include multiple entrances. Adding many entry points to your dungeon will not only enable your players to think strategically about how they want to tackle the dungeon, but it will also promote the diversity of experiences. Two groups may have completely different delves depending on the entrance they choose. Even the same group can try multiple ones. Also, make sure some entrances are not immediately apparent. Maybe some are secret passages, shortcuts that allow you to start deeper inside. Some others may have locks whose keys are found inside the dungeon, acting like checkpoints. Tip number 2, use and abuse loops. It's perfectly possible to design very interesting linear dungeons, but arguably non-linear ones are always better. They allow players to circle back, they require them to pay attention and reward those who chart their course, they enable you to surprise them from the back with random encounters, they encourage tactical decisions, they give them shortcuts to look for or alternative paths to avoid danger, and mainly, they allow them to get lost. If you want to make exploration meaningful, your players must have the right to get lost. The best part of this is, loops are super easy to do. All you need to include is a handful of extra connections between your rooms that circle back to the earlier ones. Don't forget that this applies to different levels as well. Plant more than 2 connections to other levels within the same one. They can even skip levels. Maybe the maze on level 2 has a giant stairway leading to the ruins on level 3, but also a mystical lake which magically transports you to the enchanted forest on level 4 if you dive into it. Tip number 3, there is no true path. Mega dungeons with only one true path to reach the goal become boring quite easily. If you give your players multiple ways to get the objective, not only will you be empowering them with the ability to make meaningful choices and strategic decisions, you yourself will also benefit from not knowing which path they will take. Now you don't know what's going to happen. You're no longer a bored passenger on their journey, just waiting for them to kill all the monsters so you can tell them they won. You're an active audience member, wondering what will happen, which path will they choose, which monsters will they face. Tip number 4, make secondary paths at least 2 rooms deep. Just because you should include loops, that doesn't mean you can't have dead ends. Those also serve an important role in mega dungeons, and if they're deep enough, they can even be mini-quests by themselves. But make them at least 2 rooms deep, otherwise the players will clear them too quickly and they will feel just like a side chamber along the main road instead of their own independent path. Tip number 5, secrets everywhere. Secret passages, hidden loot and the like are prime rewards for players exploring a mega dungeon. Some players will never pay attention and just want to make progress, but those who take their time to look for secret stuff need their rewards. Remember the video on narrative promises? It doesn't always need to be treasure. A secret shortcut can even be more welcome sometimes, or a secret chamber hidden from monsters where they can rest without fear, or a beautiful hidden wonder. Because your players will never discover 100% of what you hide though, it's always better to plan by excess and include lots of secrets, knowing many of them will never be unveiled. Tip number 6, encourage informed exploration. If you want to run a maze where your players are not supposed to know what the right path is, that is fine, but for all other cases, be sure to give slight hints of what's ahead to your players. For example, if they want to get deeper, you can use stairs or pits or ramps to telegraph they're going in the right direction, or even better, confuse them later on when stairs leading down are followed by stairs leading up. For more info on meaningful choices, you can check my video on the matter. Tip number 7, populate your dungeon with interesting landmarks. Many modern dungeons distinguish dungeon rooms simply by the different monsters that occupy them. But what happens when those monsters are killed or moved to another area? It's much better to populate your mega dungeon with physical landmarks which the players can use to navigate. Besides, describing the cavern covered with luminescent yellow mushrooms, the courtroom with the black obelisk over the judge's table, or the crossroads with the statue of the goddess of humanity being murdered is much more interesting than saying it's a typical dungeon room, but it has 3 kobolds and 1 drake. Tip number 8, play with dimensions. Remember that while your map is bidimensional, the dungeon is not. Include tunnels that go under corridors, chambers on top of each other, passageways that go up and down, snaking around other structures. Not only this will breathe life into the dungeon, it will also help disorient your players a little bit and keep them from trying to guess the intentions of the dungeon designer and metagame the dungeon layout. Tip number 9, use the principles of smart prep. This is true with normal dungeon design, but even more so with this challenge. You don't need a narrative description for every room of the dungeon. Instead, focus on 3 to 5 elements as bullet points and make sure to invoke all 5 senses. For example, for your first room, it's okay to simply note down 2 rugged dwarven statues, a murky pond emanating a foul smell, and 2 corpses on the water. Trust that at the table, your DM improv skills will step up and interpret that prompt in a cool narrative. Not only this will save you time both while designing and while reading the entry at the table, it also gives you more freedom to play with it. With one group, you may describe that the corpses are kobolds. With another one, you may decide, hey, you know what would be cool? If they were ghouls and as soon as a player tries to reach out, they stand up and attack. And now you have a combat. Tip number 10 is not something you should worry about for this challenge, but I figured I might mention it anyway. Don't spend time planting monsters on rooms. Instead, use random encounter tables and let your DM improv skills interpret whatever result you get, kinda like with my tip number 9. I will make a separate video about this, detailing my own method to populate my mega dungeon with monsters and deciding random encounters, but this kind of procedural content generation will make your dungeon seem alive, dynamic, and never run dry. Did your characters clear all the kobolds in a room and went home to take a long rest? Well, there's a big chance that when they return, a carrion crawler is feeding upon the corpses. The dungeon is alive, and cleared rooms don't stay cleared forever. If any of these tips seem too much of a hassle, just forget them. The main goal of Dungeon 23 is to have fun. But if you're building a mega dungeon and you'd like more in-depth advice, I will link my videos on the topic in the eye up there or down below in the Underdark as soon as I'm done making them. That's it. I wish you all a great 2023. I hope it brings us much more happiness than 2022. And I hope that by the end of the year, you have a mega dungeon to show. Thank you for watching. I'm the first Arcadian, and there is some good in this world, and it's worth fighting for.